Hello, and welcome to today's webcast, brought to you by Penn Energy. And we are proud to announce EnergyResourceCentral.com, your source for information management news from around the globe, from operational excellence to compliance and regulations within the oil and gas and power industries. Today's event, Maximizing Operation Excellence, the key role of information management, is sponsored by EMC and will be presented by Dr. Scott Shimwell. Dr. Shimwell is the Managing Director of the Rapid Response Institute, an authority and thought leader in field operations and risk management with over 30 years in the energy sector, leading turnaround and transformation processes for global S&P 500 organizations, as well as startup and professional service firms. He had been directly involved in over 5 billion acquisitions and divestitures, as well as the management of significant projects and business units. And Sean Baird, Director of Industry Marketing for EMC Corporation. Sean leads energy and engineering industry and solutions marketing for EMC's Information Intelligence Group. Sean brings over 15 years experience managing and marketing software products, holding a variety of marketing, product management, and technical positions since joining the company in 2004. Before we begin today's presentation, I want to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple application widgets you can use. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can click on the Q&A widget and submit your question. We will try to answer these questions during the live Q&A portion at the end of this webcast. You can expand the slide area by clicking on the Maximize icon on the top right of the slide area or by dragging the enlarge. In fact, you can expand and reposition many of the components on your screen. So please feel free to arrange as you desire to give you the optimal webcast viewing experience. If you have any technical difficulty during the webcast, please click on the Help widget. It has a question mark icon and addresses common technical issues. If you still need assistance, just type your issue into the Q&A widget and a member of our webcast support team will work with you to correct the problem. For your convenience, this presentation will be available on demand within 24 hours of this live event. A reminder email message will be sent to all registrants with a link to the archive. It will also be accessible from our homepage at www.pennenergy.com. A PDF of the slide deck may be downloaded via the resource list widget that looks like a green folder at the bottom of your screen. The PDF will also be available after the webcast. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Scott Shimwell.
Thank you, Joey, and good morning or afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for taking time to visit with us today. Hopefully you'll have an informative hour here. I really like this quote from the consulting company McKinsey, and it really speaks to the issues that we have in the oil and gas industry these days. I mean, I'm sure everybody knows that the sector has been through some trying times, been a number of layoffs, consolidations, equipment stacked, etc. But there's still a lot of value that can be freed up from the balance sheet of an organization. And this speaks to the production asset base, and many of you that are with oil and gas companies will say, okay, well, that's my reservoir. Those of you that are with engineering companies or service companies will say that's my fleet of truck, that's my expertise. But 30% of the value of a production base can be freed up by world-class operational excellence. In my opinion, that is really the only lever that management can control these days to advance the stock price and make sure that their organization continues to not just survive but thrive. So what is operational excellence? These 6 steps are taken from the consulting company Bain & Company, and it kind of makes some sense if you think about it. Top quartile performance, meaning that you're best in class in the top 25% of your industry from your assets performance, as we've talked about just a second ago. Immaculate reputation. What does that mean? That means that you're the gold standard. People look to your organization and say, okay, these guys know what they're doing. They're socially responsible, they high worth ethic. This is where I want to go to work. Best in class. Distinctive capabilities. Every organization has its capabilities. It differentiates itself from the others in its sector. And on top of that, I would add that it's the competency of not just your employees, but the supply chain employees as well. We all know that 90% of the employees in a facility are badged to a contractor or a subcontractor. So if one of those employees is weak, that's your weakest link. So organizations that are perceived to have high competencies, high capabilities, high performance culture. We all look to an organization and our culture as part of our strategic and competitive value. Every organization prides itself on its unique culture, but high performance culture, sometimes called high reliability, really focuses on operations and the fact that we know what we're doing, and when things happen, and sometimes they do, we are quick to respond to them and very resilient. Number 5 is world-class health, safety, and safety of the employees. It goes without saying we all want to work in a safe environment. I have heard senior executives in public forums over the past year talk about how, and these are people that are older, that they say they want their sons and daughters to go to work and come back home with all their fingers intact. That's somewhat of a different perspective than when I was a young engineer and we kind of did what we needed to do. But there really is a focus these days on health, safety, environmental stewardship. So world-class, best of breed is really what you need to have there as well. And finally, best-in-class processes and systems. Well, these are the technical processes. This is your business processes. This is your workflow. This is the way you run your business. We're going to talk a little bit later in this webinar about some of the technical systems and the capabilities to enable these business processes, but it's really focused on how we do our work and what we do every day when we go to work. So you look at these and say, okay, 6 of them. Question is, can I do 3 of them or 4 of them and be good enough? In my opinion, the answer is no. You've got to be at the top of your game in every one of them. This is a definition for operational excellence that I like. If you go out and Google the term, you'll discover that everybody's talking about operational excellence these days. And it has, like any buzzword, it has a number of different definitions on what it is. But if you can attain these 6 criteria, you will be at the best of your game, and you will free up that 30% of the capability that's locked in your balance sheet. So let's talk a little bit about a case study. This is a drilling case study, again, taken from a separate McKinsey article. And this one, if you Google drilling in McKinsey, you'll get to this pretty quickly. Operational excellence can reduce offshore drilling costs by 50%. That's a significant statement. And it tells me that we still have a lot of value that we're not extracting from the process. 80% are around project. For my entire career, which goes back 30-some years, projects have been late and over budget. So continuing to work on that process, there's a huge amount of money to be freed up in there, and some of that can be freed up pretty easily and pretty quickly. 50 to 75% are in productivity constraints. I was on a project 20 years ago when we agreed to do profit sharing with the client, and we started the process by saying, okay, we weren't going to do any change orders. We would work within the constraints that we had. Within the first day, there were change orders. So that we had a pretty weak culture, and we didn't have strong learning curves at the time. Well, that was a long time ago, and here we are today, where you can free up somewhere between 50 and 75% if you can get a stronger culture, and we just talked about that a little bit, and be better at learning. Everybody talks about continuing education, continuing process improvement, but yet we still have issues around broken learning curves. So all of the things that you're seeing in these 2 bullets are things that you can affect right away, and you don't need senior management to tell you how to do it to move forward. So we've identified some pretty significant cost savings that can be wrung out of operational excellence. Now let's talk a little bit about how we get to a status of world-class operational excellence. So over the past several years, the concept of the standard operating procedure, SOP, has moved towards an operations management system. Now, the chart that you're looking at in this particular slide, the 8 steps here, are actually taken from one of the super majors, so-called super majors or the integrated oil companies. And if you think about the bullets, it makes sense. Leadership is number one. And by leadership, we mean not just the CEO and the board of directors, but the first-line supervisors as well. Organization, we talked briefly about structures and processes. Risk management. I teach a master's level class for a university, and one of the things I constantly strive to my students is to do a risk mitigation strategy on every single project that you undertake. And a lot of times we see it's not very well done. Processes and procedures. We talked a little bit about world-class process and procedures and the solutions to enable them. Asset performance, number 5, we've mentioned that. Optimization. Getting the best out of those assets that we can, the best out of the supply chain, and achieving that top quartile percentage. Privilege to operate. This is a big one in my opinion. Increasingly we're seeing that governments, and by governments I mean the people, are saying enough. When no more accidents, no more disasters, no more ruining the economy, and they're taking away the ability of an operator to even drill and produce oil and gas. Now, if you're not an oil company, how does that impact on you? Well, we're seeing through some of the SIMS regulations, that Safety and Environmental Management Systems, out of the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, or BSEE, that an engineering company or another manufacturer or someone who's working with an operator, if you can't perform at these high levels, you could lose the right to even have that contract. Moreover, the operators are placing increasing responsibilities down on these organizations to perform at higher levels. And finally, results. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So we really are taking a hard look at not just the typical reports that we've done for a long time, but how, in fact, are we running our business. So this is, again, a high-level operations management system. It is taken from an actual oil and gas company. And we're going to move towards a process now to how do we get one of these operations management systems. So if we look at this slide, and if you look at the bottom, I talk about operational excellence governance. Those of you with an information technology background are familiar with IT governance models. Those of you that are involved with finance and corporate are familiar with governance at that level. Governance, to me, is really the way we do things. It's the basis of how we manage the business. It's not just a static statement that management puts out in the annual report. It says, okay, we're good guys and we do good work. It's really how we live the business. Across the top, you'll see the 6 criteria that we talked briefly about, and in the middle, you'll see the word SMART, intelligent content and risk management. SMART refers to telemetry. That is the smart equipment that is spewing out real-time data in an ever-increasing content. I mentioned briefly about risk before. It's key. If you cannot manage your risk, if you don't know what issues you're faced with, you cannot achieve operational excellence. And finally, intelligent content. And Sean's going to talk a little bit more about this, but this is the data and information that we have in a way that we can digest. Now, we all know that we're bombarded with information. The concept of information overload is 30, maybe even 40 years old. It's still with us. So how do we manage this massive amount of information? How do we take it down to something that's actionable and make it something that we call intelligent content? So this is the approach that we would take towards achieving operational excellence through our operations management system. So let's talk a little bit about some of the value. Now, the first statement's pretty bold. Top quartile asset performance will have enough value that it will impact the earnings per share or the stock price of the company. Now, how can I say that? Years ago, before Sarbanes-Oxley was enacted after the Enron and other debacle, there was a study that was done that says the stock price for companies that were perceived to be well-run and transparent was higher by upwards to 10-12% than the rest of them. Several years later, that same study was done, and that gap had closed, and I would argue partly because Sarbanes-Oxley required those firms that didn't have strong transparency, didn't have strong governance to catch up. So there's plenty of anecdotal evidence from other areas that if you manage those assets, you can, in fact, extract that 30% that McKinsey talks about. One example is in drilling an oil well. If you have best-in-class processes and systems, your likelihood of unplanned downtime, a safety incident are lower. And then every hour that you can finish that well, if you're the drilling company, that means you get the job done quicker. If there's bonuses to be done, paid for that, the individual and the company can extract those. And if you're the operator, even at $40 a barrel, every barrel of oil that's pumped is still worth $40. So getting to first oil from a well quicker in a safe and environmentally environmentally responsible manner adds value to the organization, and that's easily measured. Reducing the number of change orders. I talked briefly about that earlier. If you've got an organization that's well run, people are knowledgeable about their jobs, the processes are in place, the likelihood of change orders goes down. And I know that for years the engineering community has lived on change orders as a way to increase their revenue. But what really happens is the projects are late, they're over budget, everybody loses, the reputation of everybody involved shrinks. And the fourth bullet, if you have a stellar reputation and you're known for world-class safety, individuals and for individuals and environment, these companies benefit. People want to go to work there. It's easier to get that permit to operate. Likelihood is you can get better deals from your suppliers because they want to get to be part of that organization. So these are a couple of economic points, and I'm going to conclude with a few comments that I believe that use of intelligent content in an operational excellence environment is a game changer. Now, some of you may be with large organizations, you say, okay, well, this will take a long time. We'll put processes in place and several years will have it. And some of you may be working for smaller companies that say, well, we can't benefit from that because only the big can. I would argue that that's not the case. Every organization can benefit from intelligent content and achieving operational excellence. Methods and technologies are available. The price point for technologies, the availability of information, the use cases, the best practices of other organizations and other industries are readily available, and it's just a matter of putting the elbow grease to work and making it work for your organization. The economic value is documented. I've talked briefly about that. There's an accompanying white paper which will be available that goes into that in more depth with more data. And I believe that in today's environment, as I mentioned at the beginning, we've already had layoffs. We may have some more. We've had consolidations. We will have some more. We've shut down facilities. We've stacked equipment. We will probably do that some more. That's not adding value to the organization. That's survival mode. Those are the things you have to do, and I'm not arguing that they're wrong. But to extract real value out of the organization, it appears to me that operational excellence is the only thing that you can affect in the near term. Management cannot control the price of oil. Management can control the organization and its quest for operational excellence. I thank you for your time. I think there'll be a bit time for questions at the end, and I'll turn it over to Sean at this point.
All right, thanks, Scott. I think this is a really fascinating topic, and one that we've been talking to our customers quite a bit about as we look to help them to be more effective, to drive up their efficiencies and their productivity. So what I'm going to do is take a slightly more focused look at how you can actually impact your organization, and we're going to focus a little bit on the taking control of the information you have in your organization as a way to maximize your operational effectiveness. And yeah, I think there's kind of two major challenges that we see, that are impacted by the price of oil. And one of them is that we see companies really striving to increase the length of the lifespan of the assets that they do have. So, while quite obviously there's not as much new investment to build new refineries, to build new oil platforms, find new oil, there certainly is a lot of priority being assigned to making sure that the assets that they do have, that they can extend the life cycle of those. So certainly that's one key issue that we see companies focusing on. And kind of another one is around regulations and the fines that exist. And so, I'll share a case study here in a second, but, customers are certainly facing a lot of impact from this, in terms of the amount of money that they have to pay, not just in terms of fines, but in terms of being able, from an operational perspective, to support the regulatory requirements that the governments have on businesses in the oil and gas industry. So certainly trying to reduce those fines, extend the life cycle are a couple of key priorities. And one of the things that we've found as we talk to customers is that, information really is the lifeline of a plant. And that it goes throughout the entire lifespan of the plant, from early design stages all the way through operations and maintenance through to decommissioning. And although the priorities may change as you go across the life cycle, at the early stages, you're trying to manage your capital investment. Towards the end, you're focused much more on productivity and extending the life cycle, lifespan of an asset. If we look at what happens kind of underneath that, we see that there's a lot of information. And some of that information is common throughout the entire life cycle. Other pieces of it change. So you might have more design requirements and specifications early on. Maybe later on you're more focused on incident reports, change memos, compliance submissions, documents like this. But certainly the information that describes the asset and describes how to operate the asset is important information that we see throughout that is heavily used within the operations and maintenance phase of an operating asset. And I think the other piece here is that there are a number of different roles, a number of different people that need to access this information. And again, some of that changes through the asset life cycle, but you have a lot of pieces of information that will be consumed by a lot of different roles, I think is kind of the key takeaway here. And that, enabling that type of quick access interaction is really one of the keys to success in terms of improving operational effectiveness and ultimately supporting an operational excellence program. So if we look at this a little bit more carefully here, I think, one of the challenges that we see with many organizations today is that they really don't have a lot of maturity to their information management or content or document management programs. We see a lot of information still stored in paper records. Where that information has been digitized and is available in electronic form, it's often very siloed. And as a result, people don't have a real clear view where to find that information. In some cases, it might be on a document or content management system. In other cases, it might just be on file shares. In other cases, it might just simply be on somebody's hard drive or being sent through email. So there's a lot of inconsistency there, which makes it very difficult to find that information, certainly find that information quickly when it's needed. And then because of these first two factors, we see the third being a very prevalent theme across many organizations, which is that there's a high reliance upon kind of the subject matter experts within your organization. Rather than finding the true source of information, people are just going to the people that within the organization that they know the answers. And oftentimes those are extremely experienced individuals. And I think, the other key factor, although I don't have necessarily a slide to talk about this, is that many of these employees are reaching the retirement age and or retiring already. So this is an impending problem for many organizations, and one that certainly by taking a step back and looking at the situation, understanding what some of the options are, you can avoid some of the challenges that maybe are on the horizon for many organizations. So as we look at, how you might transform your information management, I think there's four kind of key phases that companies need to strive to reach. The first one is by far the most basic, and that's simply to get all your content under control. Get it into a common system, provide a single source of truth within your organization, and a common place that everyone within your organization can go to find the current information, to find the information that your engineers ought to be relying upon to actually operate your plant successfully. Second kind of step here is really about ensuring optimal access to that content. So it's not just that it's in a system and we know where that system is, it's making sure that you've got the right, that people know where it is, that you provide the right tools to be able to consume that information. For example, if you have people out in the field that need to be able to access it on mobile devices, that you've provided that level of access. Another key factor here is that, in many of these plants, we're talking not about hundreds of documents, but about thousands or maybe even millions of documents. And being able to provide good search tools to be able to find the right kind of information around the right tag numbers quickly becomes really important. If it's just a browser and hundreds or thousands or millions of files, that's going to be a very difficult system for employees to use, and you're probably not going to get them to use it very reliably. You're going to end up in much the same situation that we've seen previously. And ultimately, what you really want to do is start to add in some real key value to the system. And so one of those is around change management. We see this as a very important piece of the puzzle, and one of the areas where kind of the existing systems really fall down is that they don't deal well with change. And so putting in structured control around those change processes really allows you to ensure that that system remains current even when your plant is constantly changing. And again, in search of longer asset lifespans, that's a key thing we see a lot of, is that companies are investing, maybe not in big new capital projects, but in smaller brownfield projects to increase the efficiency or lifespan of an existing asset. So that means new specs, new operating procedures, and if those changes aren't followed through the system and aren't ultimately available to the consumers of that information, the maintenance or operations engineers that are actually performing those tasks, then they're not going to be performing it correctly, and you could, again, run into some significant challenges. And the kind of final aspect is really about searching for that extra level of productivity and really integrating the key information that you need into the key business systems that you're using today. So you might be using work order management systems, ERP systems, and in many cases, what you really want to do when you're in those systems, for example, if you have a work order to perform a maintenance operation, is you want to have right at your fingertips all the key information, all the key documents that you need to understand so that you can perform that operation correctly. You want as-built specifications, you want actual documented standard operating procedures. You may want to be able to see the history, the maintenance histories on that tag, so you understand if there's been any abnormalities or any kind of special considerations that you need to make as you go to perform that operation. The other key piece to that is that by providing that information in a very consumable way, you drive up user adoption. That's a user interface, a way of working with business systems that your employees are very familiar with. So if you just add on to that and provide that information in a place they're already familiar with, you put it right on their glide path, and you're likely to get much more success that way. Let's take a look at a couple examples of how having a system like this can really provide some key value. First example I'm going to point out here is a European oil company. They were taking charge of new platforms in the North Sea, and one of the requirements they had was that in order to take on duty Gulf holdership was that they needed to be able to prove that they had a system in place that would manage all of this asset information. So they worked with EMC and leveraged our industry solution to very rapidly get a system in place. So within 4 months, they were able to get that system fully operational and meet the requirements that they had to take on ownership. And that was a daunting task because at the beginning of this process, they basically were dumped 15 pallets worth of documents, all hard copy, no electronic documentation. They had to find a way to digitize all that information, classify all that information, organize all that information, and provide a system that end users could quickly access to be able to get at all the different types of information that we've been talking about here. So, they were able to do this. They were able to do it very rapidly because we have a solution in place that's specifically designed for this purpose. So, a real success there in terms of being able to achieve their business goals, using technology. The second example I want to talk about is a North American oil company, and this one's a little bit different. This is a very old company. They've been operating refineries and oil fields for basically a century, but they're having lots of problems, lots of issues, and the biggest challenge we're having was that they were running afoul of the regulatory agencies. So they were incurring large regulatory fines for a variety of reasons. They had incidents when the regulators came in to analyze the situation. They weren't able to quickly produce the documentation for their operating procedures or their specifications to prove that they really knew how to operate this plant safely. So they had run up, over $1 million worth of, over $4.5 million worth of fines over the previous 3 years. And, they had made attempts in the past. They had one department, for example, that had invested about $1 million to build a paper-based records database. So they still were storing their documentation in paper, but they built a database to allow them to quickly find that information within the filing cabinets or in the boxes. So, but that seems like a lot of money. It's something that maybe isn't exactly the optimal situation you'd want anyways. Further, and really the biggest problem was that they created yet another information silo with this. They did it for their own department, and they quite literally were very protective of it. They did not want other people within their organization to have access to their new system. They were proud of it. They thought it was a great system, but it wasn't a system that served the entire enterprise. It was a system that served just a narrow area of focus for the company. So, real challenge, and it wasn't, more importantly, it really wasn't helping them address their end concern. They were still incurring fines even after they'd made this investment in the records database. So again, what we worked with them on was providing true centralized document management, where we took all the documents, all digitized, all in the system. The biggest success from this was that after implementing this system, they're able to go back to the regulators and show them that they've made an investment in some specific technology that's going to allow them to address all the issues that cause these regulatory fines, and actually able to get rebates on those fines. So, again, a true success here and a real demonstration that, investments like this can yield some very, very tangible results. Just a real quick overview of the solution that EMC's provided for both of these companies and addresses the topic we have for today is the EMC Documentum Asset Operations. Now, Documentum is a recognized industry leader in enterprise content management, but what we've done specifically for the oil and gas industry is to build a purpose-built solution that addresses the issues we talked about today. It provides purpose-built user interfaces that speak to the industry. The workflows that we built in help you to are based on industry best practices and industry standards. Also, allow you to automate a lot of this process, so that when a change comes in, you don't have to manually track that change is going through an effective change management process. You've got automated workflows in place that are going to route documents to the appropriate people for review, for approval. Ultimately, those documents are going to get published, and when people do searches, they're going to get the most current and up-to-date information, not information that was current 2 weeks ago but has since changed. I mentioned that we definitely have worked with a large number of customers in this area, and we've really built this solution to reflect industry best practices and standards, like PAS 55, some of the ISO standards, and just good industry best practices. And then finally, one of the real keys to a solution like this is that we've simplified the configuration. So this is not a system where customers have bought a platform and invested in months or years of consulting to tailor the system to meet their specific requirements. We've built a generalized solution that we believe really addresses this challenge, and we have a number of customers who can attest to that. And we've really then built on some configuration to allow people to tailor it to meet your unique requirements, but you don't have to invest the tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars or even millions of dollars to customize the system further. And there are some real strong benefits that you get out of this. So obviously the information quality is going to improve here because you're taking control of it. You're not relying upon someone's faulty or potentially retiring memory on how a system ran, but you also make sure that the system is fully up to date with the new information. It's a single source of truth. So you're avoiding duplication, you're avoiding inaccuracy by people misremembering things or not being able to find things, and you're providing a system that people know they can go to find all the information. And then ultimately what you're doing is by connecting it with some of the other business processes you have in your system, whether it's ERP, work order management systems, 3D models, or other analytical information that you have about your plant, you can combine all that to ultimately have the most rich view of what's going on within your plant, of how to operate your plant, and ultimately that's going to drive some huge value for your organization. So before we open it up for questions, I just want to kind of give you a couple of key takeaways I think that certainly encourage you to pursue as you walk away from this session here. First one is to really think long and hard about what your strategy is for implementing operational excellence within your organization, how you can actually achieve your goals. There are a lot of ways to approach this, and certainly instilling good operational excellence as a culture is certainly a big part of that, but there's certainly a key role for technology to play here to provide the access to information that's required to operate your plant most effectively. I think the second thing here is around understanding where you're at from a document or content management perspective in terms of your maturity. How much of your information is being managed in the content management or document management system? How much are you leveraging that information? How much do you have business processes connected with that content to make sure that information is always current, up to date, and accessible? And then finally, one of the other big things that's going on across all industries is kind of a move to more digital information, digital communication, and that transformation really is impacting organizations across all sectors, across all industries. And I think it's one that it certainly has, having information available in a quickly accessible electronic way is certainly a key part of that, and it's part of a digital transformation strategy. So consider what your company's goals are from digital transformation as you're contemplating what type of systems you might need to support your operational excellence programs, and make sure that there's good synergy between those two things. Because in some cases they are very much aligned, but I think if you're not aware of where the overall company's objectives are, sometimes you can end up with somewhat of a fragmented solution here for achieving your ultimate business goals. So anyway, I hope that was helpful. We wanted, I think at this point, to open it up for questions. So I'm going to hand it back to the moderator for that next step.
Thank you, Sean. We do have a few questions, and we'll get right into that. First, could you please explain which are these industry best practices? And then, for instance, EMC document asset ops.
Yeah, so when I talk about industry best practices, what I'm talking about is looking at how organizations want to be able to store and consume that information. So part of it is organization, taxonomies, the types of metadata that are typically applied to content so that it can be organized properly and quickly found. I think the other key piece of this is around some of the processes that that are in place around content to make sure that it is reviewed and approved by the right individuals. So there's a lot of investment there in terms of how the information is organized, how it's searched for, and what kind of change management processes. Especially there's many processes that are built into our system, but I think the one that probably is most relevant here, and it certainly has a lot of industry input into, it's been around change management, making sure we've got good change management processes so that when content either is new and being created or is being changed, that the right review cycles are in place and the right individuals get to review that information. And also that you have the right level of approvals. And that you not only go through that process, but store an audit trail of that process so that if there's ever any question downstream, why was this change made, who approved this change, you have access to all that information quickly accessible. So that's kind of the key areas that we've done from an investment perspective around making sure that the system is reflective of industry best practices.
Okay. Next question. Solutions like EMCs seem like a major leap from existing systems and processes. What are some reasonable steps that will engender user adoption, yet still enable the benefits you describe?
Yeah, I think, so a couple things here. I think, one of the key, focusing on individuals, and this is extremely important. And you hear a lot of discussion about this, with operational excellence programs, but I think it's especially important when we're talking about implementing new technology is making sure that you understand how people in your organization want to be able to consume information, what systems they're using today, how they search for information. So that's one of the areas we spend a lot of time about, and that's an area where I think we've applied some best practices in these solutions. But I think it's also important to consider, kind of what systems people are in today and what kind of user interfaces they like. If I can here, I'm going to try and switch back to a slide that I went kind of quickly through earlier. But I think it provides a good model for kind of a stepped or phased approach to implementing a system like this. Getting to that nirvana state where you have a system that is just humming along and is reacting to change management, people are consuming information in applications like the work order management system, I think is ultimately where everyone wants to be. But if you're coming from a paper-based world where you're relying upon your most seasoned pros to be able to provide information to new employees today, it seems like a major leap. So what we've typically done with our customers is recommend they kind of take this phased approach where, the first step is really just focused on the content itself, making sure you get all that content managed, you've pulled it from the various sources, you pulled it from the various formats into something that is consistently managed and consumable. I mentioned providing access, so providing better search capabilities, providing access to mobile devices is certainly an aspect of that, making it quick and easy to get to the content. So, and then, ultimately what you're trying to do here is engender user adoption. So making sure it's easy to get to that content is a huge step in that process. The final two, I think, can often be kind of next phase, but change management obviously very important, and I think layering in some of those business processes so that your information is managed properly through those changes is extremely important. And ultimately, where I think we don't see customers starting, but where we know they want to go is where you have integrations with some of the key other business systems that you have. And we see that across a variety of different systems, but typically work order management, ERP. Sometimes mapping data is important, so you're having coordinates of various parts or tags, and being able to show people, if you're in a vicinity, kind of what the key systems are that they might be able to focus on, or providing people directions on how to get to the pieces of equipment they need to get to in order to be able to perform their tasks is also another key piece of that. So this last step is really kind of providing that next level integration so that it really is fully within the glide path of what a person does a given day. They don't necessarily have to know that there's a new information management system in place, but they're benefiting because that information is available in the systems they're using already.
Great. Can EMC provide management of online information, like from a control room, for optimal use of the information to achieve the best operation results?
Certainly. Yeah, I don't think any reason why that would be a challenge. I mean, I think, in terms of access to information, as long as you're, connected to the internal systems, you should be able to access that system in a control room or at a key. We've seen it at a kiosk in the field as well. As I mentioned earlier, we do have some mobile apps as well that allow you to do things like search and find information. If you're moving to a plant where you don't have access to the business system because there's no wireless or cellular coverage in that area, maybe like an offshore platform, what we've often seen is what people will do is download that information to their mobile device so that when they're out in the field, they have access to the information they need. So within a control room, absolutely. I think, depending upon how you want to integrate that into some of the systems that you're using in that control room is something that, certainly may require some further discussion, but there's certainly no reason why you couldn't provide access to the information you need within the control room through a system like this.
We have time for a few more. OE is often described as having three components: management, people, and technology. Aren't the first two much more important than the third? What is the role of technology in an OE program?
So I'll take a crack at this, but I'd certainly like Scott to get in, respond to this one as well. I mean, I've been to many operational excellence conferences, and there's often a lot of talk about management styles and management strategies to implement and kind of create a new culture. There's a lot of focus on the people and instilling that spirit within culture within your organization to make sure that operational excellence is a priority, and that can be a major change. And I certainly understand, why that's an area of major focus. But I think there's, in many cases, like when I hear, customers relating their successes, their reliance on technology is still pretty limited. I mean, they're documenting things in Word, totally fine. They have PowerPoints that are describing things. They certainly have using Office to provide spreadsheets of where all the information is. But I think there's what it's doing is it's missing the opportunity to take advantage of some of the efficiencies that technology can bring. And I think of that in terms of reducing the amount of time to be able to access the information they need, not just expecting people to know what the standard operating procedures are for a certain part, but making sure that information can be accessed extremely rapidly. It's not just that you have that information, it's that you have it in a consumable form, in a place that people can find it. And I think also, a lot of the automation that we've talked about here around change management and other business processes, I think, a real opportunity for technology to provide value above and beyond what you're doing to better instill that culture. I think that technology can help provide a good platform for ensuring that your employees are practicing operational excellence on a daily basis.
If I could add to that, Sean.
Yeah.
If I could add to that, the 6 criteria that I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, those are all information intensive. Management, and by management I mean everybody from the CEO down to the first line supervisor, cannot make decisions in a timely manner if they don't have access to the information. And searching for it and taking time to do it and forgetting about it are things that people do as a general rule in the old way. So without technology linchpin to all this, I don't see that you can get operational excellence, and certainly it'd be very hard to sustain it for the long term without the systems in place to manage that. And remember, the last bullet I talked about was business processes and systems, and certainly what we've talked about today is one of the enabling systems for operational excellence.
Thank you, Scott and Sean. Next question. Obtaining operational excellence seems like a lengthy process to undertake. Is there a change management process that we can use?
You know, I think that one of the things that you've got to take a look at anytime you're going to transition an organization or transform an organization, depending on the term you're using, or change management, you've got to look at the problem that you're trying to solve and parse it down into a set of steps. We typically, in any kind of transformational process, will do a pilot, do a proof of concept, make sure things work. Look for that low-hanging fruit where we can see some value that people can recognize and demonstrate, say, okay, this makes sense to me, I can go forward with it. I think if you said, okay, we're going to transition a multi-billion-dollar organization to operational excellence without a detailed plan and processes in place, and as well as executive sponsorship, there is no case that I'm familiar with where a transformation has taken place without a key commitment from management. You saw in the first bullet on the operations management system was leadership. If the leaders aren't behind this, it isn't going to work. And if the leaders aren't sustaining the process day in and day out, they're just wasting time and money and ultimately shareholder value. But I think what you can do with any kind of transformation like this is find the baby steps, the first things to demonstrate to people, okay, this is successful, and goes forward like that. One of the questions I saw was about what is our best practices in the upstream. If you look at what the large oil companies are doing, and I'm not going to name any names, but if you Google operations management systems and look at the top 5 oil companies, you'll find all of them have initiatives underway right now. They're very similar to each other. They're solving the same problem, but there's a lot of good information into what they're doing. You're also starting to see through things like the Center for Offshore Safety, which is an API, or American Petroleum Institute organization, requirements for much safer operations than we've had in the past. Now, they're focused on offshore, but my experience, what I've seen, is that this is cascading down to onshore, to shale, internationally, et cetera. And so there's really a lot of information out there on what people are trying to do to attain operational excellence. So some of the best practices that are available are pretty straightforward and interesting and very applicable probably to most organizations represented on this call.
Thank you, Scott. And our last question, I'm not sure if you will have the answer to this or if Sean will. Are there any more items to share on U.S. Federal Regulation Commission issues that utilities face?
Yeah, I don't have a lot
really
of
speak to that. Most of my experience is upstream.
I agree, and I think the key thing here, again, from my understanding of the case study that I presented here, is that there were kind of two issues that the company was having. One is they were making mistakes in terms of their their operations and maintenance of their existing facility. They were causing both safety and environmental they were breaking both the safety and environmental rules and causing incidents on that front. And was the follow-on inquiries into that company generated some further fines that were based on their lack of governance of the information that they needed, that they are required to make available and then have available to ensure the safe operation. So, I think it's really kind of a classic case in many ways of this reliance upon, kind of tribal knowledge to be able to operate a plant rather than having, well-documented, operational excellence programs in place, to be honest. So, I think, again, this is a really good question. Unfortunately, I'm not the right person to kind of view the details on that, but I certainly encourage you to pursue that, because I think what you'll find is that, once you have an awareness of what those regulations are, you'll see that, systems like what we're talking about here can provide some significant value.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you both. And on behalf of Penn Energy and Pinnell Corporation, I would like to thank both of our speakers today, Dr. Scott Shimwell, Managing Director of Rapid Response Institute, and Scott Baird, Director, Industry Marketing, EMC Corporation. And we would like to also thank our sponsor, EMC, for today's presentation. This presentation will be archived within 24 hours and can be accessed from our homepage at www.pennenergy.com. A reminder email message from the archive will be sent to all registrants, complete with a direct link to the archive. We thank you for joining us today and look forward to serving you with future webcasts.